Hey guys, today we have Katie. As you know, she's one of our physical therapists at our office. And one of the things that she specializes in is women's health. And so, one of the common things we get asked, and I literally had a message this morning on this very topic, is Kegel exercises and why it's the go to and why it doesn't always work. I mean, we literally had a person contact us having issues with leaking. And he was like, I can't remember what the exercise was. And I'm like, Kegels. And I'm like, he goes, yeah, that's it. That's it. And I'm like, yeah, let's talk about that. You need to come in and you need to talk to Katie because there's way more that can be helped besides just doing Kegel exercises. So let's
Yes.
talk about a little bit about what Kegel exercises are, and we'll start there.
Awesome. So Kegels were created by an OBGYN 75 years ago. Like that's a lot of years ago. And it's a way to get the pelvic floor muscles to contract. A lot of times people hear like, oh, well, if you are peeing, stop the flow of urine. That's like a good way to describe what a Kegel is. I wouldn't recommend actually doing that because that's a good way to make your pelvic floor a little bit too tight, which we can get into. But that's basically what it is. It's tightening up the pelvic floor. I don't know why we have gone down this rabbit hole of this is what we do. This is the only thing that we do. And that's kind of how doctors have seen it for a while. And I completely disagree with that, which we will also get into.
Well, it's so funny because I mean, if I did physical therapy, what they did, they didn't have physical therapy 75 years ago. It's like it was nursing that was taking care of stuff. Like no one would get better. So for us not to like update this idea of what we can do and part of it's just there's not enough education out there, which is why we do what we do. It's providing education on different topics because there's not enough education out there. Doctors don't know how things can be helped naturally, even from a physical therapy perspective with other injuries. We see it all the time. So let's go into maybe why tightening is not always a problem. What are some things that can that this can really harm conditions for?
Absolutely. So if your pelvic floor is too contracted, that muscle is too short, then it's going to cause a lot of pelvic pain. We don't want pain. So if you think about it like you've got a weak biceps muscle, are you only going to do bicep curls for your biceps muscle? No. What's going to happen if you do that? It's going to be painful. So why are we treating our pelvic floor muscles that way? It's not a great way to see that. So learning how to coordinate the pelvic floor, learning how to relax it as well as contract it, that's going to be way more beneficial.
Well, it's kind of like you go back to that scenario of like, you don't just use your bicep when you are, throwing a baseball or whatever the case may be. You have to have everything coordinated so that it works correctly. You don't just focus on one muscle. And that's essentially what's happening with our pelvic floor. It's the same concept.
Mhm.
There's so many things that need to happen, and it's not just tightening that needs to happen.
Exactly, exactly. And that's something that people just don't understand. They're like, oh, Kegels, Kegels, Kegels. But that's not the case. You have so many other muscles that need to also help you. And that's how they all coordinate together and make it so you stop leaking or prolapse isn't as bad, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So let's get into leaking. That's a common thing that happens. Definitely happens after having kids, but you don't have to be a female for this to happen. This can happen with males as well. You don't have to have a baby for this to happen. It just can happen as we get older. But tell us a little bit about like why Kegels shouldn't be the thing that you do. Like just let's talk about that.
Yeah. So if we think about it like the biceps, so many other muscles have to get involved in order to get you to throw that baseball. So same thing with your pelvic floor. You need good abdominal activation. Your breathing. Oh my goodness, breathing is one of the most important things for the pelvic floor because you've got that respiratory diaphragm that sits underneath your ribs, sitting right underneath your lungs. If that's not moving correctly, then all of your abdominal viscera, your intestines and whatnot, are getting pushed down into the pelvic floor in a way that they shouldn't be. And then more pressure on your bladder, more leakage. So breathing, huge. Lower abdominals, huge. Even like outer glutes, inner thighs, all of those things need to coordinate to help with the pelvic floor. If you don't have good coordination there, everything else is going to be completely skewed.
Well, what would happen if someone just goes, okay, I have leaking, I'm just going to do Kegels?
Oh man. it can actually cause a muscle to become too tight. We call this a hypertonic muscle, and that can actually lead to more leakage because then the muscle gets so exhausted that it can no longer do what you're trying to get it to do.
Wow, that's so crazy. So let's go into another common thing, prolapse. Like, I don't know how many people are like, okay, we're just going to take your uterus out because you have prolapse. Like, doctors don't even know that you can take care, people don't even know that you can take care of this naturally. So let's get into a little bit about prolapse and like why Kegels may not be the option and maybe some like other things that we have to look at.
Yeah, so prolapse, if we just kind of get into what it is, it's when the pelvic contents are actually starting to protrude. So people feel like pressure on that lower pelvic area. Some people feel like they're sitting on marbles when they have a pretty bad prolapse as well. So same thing, you got to get into what is actually causing it. Is it an actual weakness in the pelvic floor, or is it ligament laxity that's causing those contents to start to kind of descend and fall down into the pelvic floor? Like, what's actually happening? Because there's a lot that can be going on. So again, getting the muscles working, getting that coordination, that's going to be way more important than just doing Kegels, because again, Kegels can actually cause weakness from that too tight muscle. So it kind of is,
Work it. Eventually it's going to become weak, just like anything else. That's what happens when you have a tendonitis or pain in the body, anything. If you overdo it and it can't take it, it's going to basically just not work anymore.
exactly.
Well, and just like anything else, anyone that comes to our office, it's, we want to avoid surgery, we want to avoid those kind of things. And a lot of times when we see people having surgery these days, a lot of times it's just treating a symptom. And that's essentially what happens when you take your uterus out. It's just, you're treating the symptom of something else that's going on, which is why a lot of times those surgeries fail and you have the exact same problem that happened again because you never got to the source of the problem. So that's something to think about. We don't think about that when we think of like women's health or the pelvic floor. But yeah, I know several people that have had surgeries that wish they never would have had them.
Oh yeah, and a lot of research is showing that if you go in for one pelvic surgery, there's, I think it's like a 96% chance that you go in for a second one. Like, it's really high.
Same with back pain. You have one back surgery and the likelihood of you having a second and third is very high. Because again, it's the same concept. We're just not getting to the source of the problem. And we do that a lot in our healthcare system. So another issue that we see all the time is pregnancy. So pregnancy, we want to say strong, you want a strong pelvic floor, like that's what we're told. So tell us a little bit why you don't want to necessarily do Kegels when you are pregnant.
So same thing, it's going to make that muscle so tight and strong that it's going to eventually end up weak. So I don't recommend that any of my pregnant ladies do Kegels, because it's actually going to make it so, because it's so tight, vaginal births become a little bit more complex, and you don't have the coordination of the muscles to actually relax that area. So then the birthing process is just way, like, it can be prolonged, it can be more painful, more prone to tearing if that pelvic floor isn't able to relax the way that it should. So lots of bad things can happen. So we don't want to overdo Kegels when you're pregnant.
So what other conditions that we typically see that Kegels is usually something that they would recommend? Or those the main ones?
So I feel like a lot of people are told to do Kegels with pregnancy. People that have that abdominal separation, I don't know why they're telling them to do Kegels, but I've seen that. Prostate issues, lots of prostate issues. People are coming in for pelvic floor PT and I've been told to do Kegels. Prolapse, the leakage with the bladder, all of these conditions, people are told, go do your Kegels, and that's it.
Urgency, because that's something else that happens a lot. Like after you have kids, you're having to go to the bathroom more often. We see people that typically are told, "Oh, do Kegels for this because that will help."
Yep, it happens all the time. People are like, "Oh, just do your Kegels," but then these people are going more often, and they're not able to stop the urgency that they have to go. So it's not getting down to the root cause of what's actually going on.
Yeah. Well, this is so helpful because I know, when I was Googling a lot of conditions, like that's the first thing that pops up is do Kegels, do surgery, or you just have to live with it. Like those are probably the three most common things that popped up. And it's so crazy to me. And I know you were looking up like an example of how to do Kegels on Google. Well, what did it share on like what you were supposed to do?
Oh my goodness, it said hold a Kegel for 10 seconds, repeat it 20 times, 5 times a day. So 100 Kegels a day plus holding it for 10 seconds each time. I was mortified reading that because when would you do that with any other condition?
Yeah, you have like one muscle that you want to hold it for 10 seconds and do it 20 times, 5 times a day. That muscle would be completely exhausted, wiped out, and you would have more pain with any body part that you have.
Yes.
So
Yes.
imagine that you have more pain in your pelvic area because you're, doing these exercises that is you find on Google.
Mm-hmm.
And
Awful.
we all know, like, I always tell people, you can always, go to Dr. Google to find out information, and it has a place because it does give you some ideas of, oh, these are some good questions I can ask because I'm not really sure. But ultimately, if you want to get the fastest resolution, you find the people that are specialists in these areas, in any area that you're looking for, because they're going to be able to identify, get to the source, and get you there so much faster. And honestly, most people, I mean, I know when they come into our office, they've tried so many different things. They've been told that it's not possible. They've been told they have to have surgery. There's all these things that people are being told, and it's just not true. So if you're having any of these conditions, or even if you know someone that's having any of these conditions, please, you can always come in, sit down, have a free 30-minute consultation to sit down and talk a little bit more so we can really help you and educate you to making a better decision about your health. So thank you so much. This was so helpful, and I'm so glad this information is getting out to other people.
Yes, I agree.